You guys sent me a list of the professions most likely to cheat, and healthcare was at the top of that list.
And we had that before I listened to the episode. Yes.
Yeah, so this episode, Bill, as you know, was about a woman whose husband was really, really ill. I mean, he had an IV, bags, all sorts of equipment attached to him to help him breathe, to help him function. He was hospitalized, and his nurse decided to go after him, and she had an affair with him, and she'd climb on top of him in the bed, and they would have sex in the hospital, and then the wife found out, and it was a really well-known story, actually. It's in the papers. I disguised the guest's name and identity because I just think it's better, right? We're not here to out people or, we just want to tell the stories and the story behind the story. But the woman just kept going on and on. You can't believe this story.
It is jaw-dropping and scary as hell. And, obviously, and you do a great job of the pacing. Because at first you're like, A, how did this happen? B, why? And then we finally kind of get to it. It's just the blackmail aspect. And
exactly. So the nurse was blackmailing the patient because she was in her 30s, he's in his 60s, and she videotaped their sex and said, if you don't pay me, I'm going to send these videos to your family, to your wife, etc.
And I think the moral of the story is we should pay healthcare workers more. So that they don't need to resort to those sorts of tactics.
Oh,
it was just the craziest story.
Oh, boy.
And obviously this one was in the news, and if you haven't listened to it, run, don't walk. But so this one's in the news, so this is a little easier to sort of pinpoint, track down, what have you. But how do you, what's the main way you find some of these guests?
Well, in the beginning, when I started 2 years ago, I would literally walk up to anybody at a gas station, in a parking lot, and say, hey, I've got this podcast. Do you know anyone? And I did find some really great guests. One of my best guests was a woman I just stopped at a gas station, and she ended up having a story about how she was with her boyfriend for 9 years. And for 9 years, he would come home late or not show up on Christmas Eve or have the phone ringing and he wouldn't show her who was calling. 9 years. And finally, she's like, oh my God, he's having an affair with someone in his office. What makes that story particularly unbelievable is that she was a therapist. And so she wasn't able to see the forest through the tree. She couldn't see in her own situation that she was being gaslit by this guy for 9 years. But to answer your question, now the stories come to me. I'm so happy.
Great.
Yeah.
I had 2 calls from New Zealand this week.
Ooh.
I know, ooh.
They have cheaters there?
I'm just trying to think of
No,
the
they have
time difference.
hot cheaters. These New Zealand guys are hot. So they've got hot cheaters, and one of them actually isn't a cheater. He's a coach. But, there's these great stories.
He coaches cheaters.
No.
How to do it right?
No,
Did they get caught?
No. I did have a guy like that from the UK. He was called Dark Horse, and he would teach people how to effectively cheat.
Brilliant.
They would pay him to do this. But no, I get guests from all over the world now, and it's just so gratifying and rewarding to know that people are listening, and really, we want to help people. It's about getting information. It's about not feeling alone, because when you're in that situation, whether you're the betrayed partner or the affair partner, it can feel really alone.
Now, how many people that you interview are in the thick of it? Or are most people kind of over the hump?
Great question. More often than not, they're over the hump.
Okay.
Because some of them are getting a divorce. They're like, well, my attorney doesn't want me to talk, or I don't want the person to retaliate against me.
Right.
Sometimes they're in the thick of it, but you're exactly right. More often than not, they're over the hump. And that's also a great thing because sometimes we laugh. Sometimes we look back and they're like, this happened 10 years ago. What the hell was I thinking?
Yeah.
What was I doing? I mean, I have a woman recently, she was telling her story from about 12, 15 years ago, and she was so humble, and so much like, what I did was wrong. She would babysit for her affair partner's kids. So she's having an affair with this guy, and she would go to the couple's house and babysit their kids.
Oh, man.
Help the wife clean her closet, help her wife organize. So she was right in there. And on the podcast, she's like, what was I thinking? What was I doing? Who is this person? And I've come so far from that.
Yeah.
And that's a running theme, you think? I think that I recall that as well. I think a lot of these people are just like, I was a different person back then.
I was a different person, yeah.
You know, and I'll tell you the therapist story changes my mind a little bit, but like with regards to the nurse story, I recall the wife in question saying that something she just, despite the fact that this guy's on death's door, and I'm a big believer in women's intuition, mostly because I know I don't have any, and I'm not a woman. I'm not. But time and time again, I know many a woman that is better than any lie detector. And and the only time that they screw themselves up is they try to fight their intuition.
Correct.
But she knew. She knew.
Correct.
And she felt it the same way that something that happened to her in 73 or something.
Exactly.
Yes. And
it's the most common theme, from my high-powered New York divorce attorney to my 70-year-old who found out or sensed that her husband was sleeping with the college student in the buildings that he cleaned on campus. The common theme is something inside me told me this just isn't right.
And, oh, that is fascinating. I wonder if, I just don't know if guys have that same gene, or maybe it's just me.
I do, because I really try and be balanced on the show. I do have more women who are the betrayed partner than the affair partner, although I do have women. I had a woman on, and she said, yep, started sleeping with my neighbor's husband. And I had another woman who said, I'm in my 50s. I had a hot neighbor, 30. He'd mow the lawn. And when his wife would go out to work, I'd slide in over to his house, and we'd do it in the living room, and we'd do it in the bedroom, and then we'd all hang out together on the weekends at barbecues. So I was like, oh my God!
Yes, I absolutely remember that one. And it's just, it puts a cold shiver down anyone's spine who seems to have a happy life in the suburbs.
Wow.
Hey, I'm from the suburbs. It doesn't only happen in the suburbs. It happens right in the city, too.
Oh, the city, I would assume it's a lot easier. But the suburbs, I don't know. I'm getting themes of the Ice Storm movie.
It feels like a lot of work.
Yeah, well,
Which is always what fascinates me about having more than one partner. Cheating, there's a whole other sort of secretive emotional aspect to it. But like polyamorous couples, people who, even when you can be open about it, it's like the scheduling alone. I don't know how you do it. So then adding in the secrecy, the covert operations.
Children.
It's just, but I guess there has to be something rewarding about it, or there must be a feeling of it being worth it for people to go through with it, because the reality is we're all fucking lazy. We are lazy pieces of shit. Like trying to get people to go to the gym, to pay bills on time, all of that. So I guess it's the thrill or the whatever that encourages people to go on with it.
Yeah.
We won't even go pick up food when we order it. We pay an outrageous fee to get it delivered. I don't understand.
People want to feel validated and heard. So your affair partner, you see them at their best. They see you at your best. You're all prepared to have sex or be intimate or have fun. You're not getting together with them to like take out the garbage or do the mundane things that you have to do with your partner or spouse. So it's really this outlet that lets you live a whole other reality. So you feel validated, you feel heard. And as people get older, I often hear, the affair partner made me feel young again. I felt like I could reclaim my youth. Wow. I didn't have to deal with all the responsibilities and practicalities of home life.
Fascinating. And I'll tell you what, I remember I've always loved the movie Moonstruck. It's delightful if you haven't seen it, people. But I remember I saw it initially when I was pretty young. And I remember that great scene with Olympia Dukakis. Oh, and he was the father on Frasier. He just recently died, and he is this teacher. And remember, he gets the drink thrown at him because he's having dinner with this girl that he's teaching.
Never seen it, but okay.
Oh, because you were nodding your head. I'm like, oh, you remember this part. And he's like 30 years older than her, right?
Yeah.
And she goes and sits down with him, and her husband had been cheating. She's like, let me tell you something. Why do men fool around? And he gives this sort of long-winded professor answer. She's like, I think it's because you're afraid of dying. I think it's because you're afraid of your own mortality. And I remember as a young man thinking to myself, just because we're scumbags. But now that I've gotten older, more and more I'm like, I think that's it. Particularly like, guys, especially when they get older, they don't necessarily have the drive to do such things just for the sake of sex. But the very idea that they're somehow escaping mortality, that they're getting older, and that this is some sort of a young thing that just sort of, kind of goes against I'm like, that scene makes more and more sense to me now that I've gotten older.
And there are different types of affairs. People go straight to sex when they think about an affair.
Yeah.
But particularly online, there are a lot of emotional affairs. People that don't even necessarily get together other than DMing and texting. But studies have shown that when you're in a digital relationship, you're more prone to share your personal and intimate secrets because you don't have to face the person. Think about it. It's like when you want to tell someone bad news, you're going to text them, or if you want to avoid somebody, you're going to text them. It's easier to communicate via text than it is to deal with someone face to face. So the tendency is to become more intimate emotionally more quickly when you are corresponding with someone online.
Yeah.
And it makes so much sense. Also, you always feel like you have to provide the goods. To keep the back and forth going, you got to re-up and for lack of a better word, continue to make yourself more entertaining. Because that's all you've got right there. Rather than looking hot or doing something flirtatious, you've got to provide anecdote after anecdote.
Yeah.
And you're ending up sharing a lot.
Or not even have to, but like want to.
Yeah.
Want to. You're right.
I think of You've Got Mail. Which is probably like the original digital affair. It starts out with both of them in relationships, and they've joined a chat room and they're talking with each other. And they're sharing with each other what they are not sharing with their current partners.
Bingo.
And it's not like, ooh, yeah, like sexy talk. No. It's like, I'm afraid my business is going to fail, or I'm afraid I'm not enough.
Right.
And yeah. And then I think when you get the response that validates you, you said it's all about the validation, then you want to share more and more.
And typically, people aren't waking up and saying, hey, I'm going to go out and find an affair partner today. It happens just like what you're saying. Typically, we have conversations, we're having a smoothie together after yoga class. Slowly by slowly, you're at work, maybe you see them in the, lunchroom a couple times a week. You start to chat about your children, about your issues, about your life. And slowly by slowly, you start to gain a sense of emotional intimacy with this person. And then before you know it, you're doing things that are secretive, which is what most people deem an affair.
Yeah.
It's when you have those secret unions, those secret meetings that your partner has no idea about. That's when most people start to qualify a relationship as an affair.